Welcome back to this edition of Talking Europe. We're going to continue our look at the EU-Canada trade deal and its possible impact on agriculture. For this half of the show, we've come to one region that almost scuppered the entire deal and indeed has yet to ratify, of course, that final text. We're in Wallonia, the French-speaking region of Belgium, to meet with the Minister-President, Mr. Paul MAGNETTE, the man who made Canada cry. He's waiting for us right down there. Mr. Paul MAGNETTE, lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Thanks for your time.
Welcome in Namur.
Thanks so much. We're looking at this CETA deal. Of course, you made your name really for being the one man in Europe that was asking for more concessions, standing up against it at the end. You've even written this book, Europe When It Goes Off the Rails. The deal has been signed by the European Parliament, not completely ratified yet. Is it a done deal?
Oh, it's certainly not the end of the story. We've indeed signed. The European Parliament has also approved the CETA as it had been amended after the negotiation with Wallonia, but it's only partially and provisionally entered into force, which means that it now needs to be ratified. We've defined a set of conditions that have to be met, and we haven't seen how those conditions have been met so far. So we still have had at least 2, maybe 3 years of discussion on how those conditions can be met before we can ratify and the treaty can actually enter into force.
Okay, so we could see some backtracking on certain elements still?
Yes, maybe. We've asked, for example, an opinion of the European Court of Justice on the compatibility of the CETA with the European legal order. It will take time. The court will certainly ask 1.5, maybe 2 years' time to give this opinion. And when we will read this opinion, if we come to the conclusion that, for example, those dispute settlement mechanisms are not compatible with the European legal order, we will not ratify. So this would imply new amendments.
Indeed, that was one of the main concerns, was this court system and the power of national governments in a line with multinational companies. We're looking in this show a lot at agriculture. When it comes to the agricultural sector, is there elements of CETA that worry you?
There are, or more precisely there were, very important problems with the CETA as it was, and many concerns. It was unclear, for example, whether we could still be instead to say that we don't want to import GMOs to the European Union, whether it would still be possible to refuse importation of hormone beef and that kind of things. So we had to negotiate with the European Commission to clarify all those aspects and to have written black on white very clearly in very precise terms that we will be able to reject GMOs, to reject hormone beefs, to reject also all products that are not conform to European legislation. And I think that those new safeguards that have been defined in the amendments to the treaty are very important.
Another concern people have, however, is that, you know, Europe will be flooded, notably by Canadian pork and beef. Do you think this is the case?
Canada is a rather small market. It's 35 million inhabitants compared to the 500 million inhabitants in the European Union. So the actual risk that Canadian products would be too important and destabilize European market is per se quite limited. But it can happen in some countries. I mean, if one specific sector, beef for example, and have a lot of exports to one specific country on one specific region, it can destabilize the market. So in those circumstances, it must remain possible for those regions and countries to use the safeguard clauses under the GATT agreement to protect the producers here in Europe. And this holds also true for Canada. So it's an agreement which is in the interest of both sides. And also there's a big issue about the environment and climate change. I mean, what's the meaning in 21st century after the Agreement of Paris, where the European Union and all its member states committed to fight global climate change? What's the meaning of importing beef that will have to be transported by boat 5,000 kilometers, while we have lots of very good high-quality beef here everywhere in Europe?
Why do you think you were really the only one, you know, standing up and asking for things to be changed in those final weeks and months?
I was really surprised to come to the conclusion that we were quite isolated, because when I talked with colleagues in many member states, many colleagues told me, well, we agree with you, we have the same concerns. So I do not realize why they haven't voiced them more strongly in their contacts with the European Commission. And many people were in the end happy with the concessions that were made to Wallonia, because of course they will not be valid for Wallonia alone, but they will be applied to all European countries.
Well, indeed, the figures of 75,000 tonnes of pork, 50,000 tonnes of beef did get a lot of meat farmers here in Europe worried. Our reporter Annie Scarrard went to visit with them and see what they think. And she also met with an MP here in Wallonia who believes that this trade deal with Canada can only mean better business for everyone.
Eric Wyngaert's cows can consider themselves lucky. Their diet is made up of linseed, rich in omega-3 oils, and beans that he grows himself. It's not cheap, but he reckons it's more wholesome than the feed given to cattle in Canada.
They're not treated with genetically modified feed. Over in Canada, all they give them is maize and then some soybeans. The soybeans are grown over there, and that means production costs are less expensive than us. We have to pay 400 euros a ton for linseed and 280 to produce the beans. So the big difference is that a hectare costs 25,000 euros, and in Canada, it's barely 5,000 euros.
European meat producers fear a massive influx of Canadian beef. The CETA deal will increase the import quota in Europe from 7,600 tonnes today to over 60,000 tonnes. Eric Wyngaert has been following the CETA negotiations since 2012. He says Europe's health protections for things like growth hormones are being sabotaged by the rush to sign a deal.
It's impossible to do a test for growth hormones in the muscle. It needs to be done in the internal organs. To find the residue of the hormone, it has to be no older than 6 months. So if we import it in vacuum packs, it'll be impossible for us to do the test.
For its opponents, the CETA deal is bartering food safety for low prices.
The final goal of this deal is that Europe wants the cheapest possible goods. And why? To allow big agribusiness to make as much profit as possible. All that on the back of farmers that are being asked to produce more and more at the lowest price.
The CETA deal was almost scuppered at the 11th hour by the Parliament of the French-speaking region of Belgium, Wallonia, over fears it would damage their agricultural sector.
This is where we have our debates, here and over there. This closeness creates added excitement in the debates, because we're face to face. Things can get heated very fast.
But with the CETA deal advancing, even some here in Wallonia are seeing the opportunities to seize.
The basis of a trade deal like this one is to reduce customs duties. Today, for example, the best of European products, things that we love, you can't find them on the shelves in Canada. That goes for France, for Wallonia, because of the customs duties. And in the future, they should be on Canadian tables.
The CETA deal is designed to bring the EU and Canada closer together economically. But for its opponents, the opportunities it provides come at the cost of too many concessions.
So, Mr. Magnette, we saw there, well, one MEP saying that really you were putting all of Belgium's exports in jeopardy almost when you were trying to negotiate that deal, and Wallonia accounts for a very tiny part of that.
Right, but it was not a question of export or import of interest of our companies. It was a question of principles that we wanted to discuss. And now we have required much more guarantees for all citizens and much more guarantees of impartiality of the judges and of these judicial procedures. There's a principal question there again. Why do we need a specific court for that kind of conflict? Why would multinationals be some kind of super citizens having more rights than the rest?
So in the final CETA deal, how do you think that problem will be solved?
Well, the simplest solution would be simply to forget all those mechanisms and to say we rely on national jurisdictions. We have very good national jurisdictions everywhere in the EU and in Canada too. And all citizens can sue companies and companies can sue states. It's a much more open and much more, in a system which gives much more judicial guarantees to all parts.
Well, one of the things being touted as an advantage of this CETA deal is the geographical indicators, that is basically offering protection to products made in specific regions of the EU, Parmesan cheese, for example. With the CETA deal, there'll be 145 of them put in place. Surely that's a very good thing, and the EU, will be having much more of a place in the Canadian market.
Well, it's a good step. I mean, we've always supported this idea that all those products which have a very high quality, which are made with people who have a very good craft, should be protected. And so the fact that Canada has accepted that is a good step. But now we hope to widen the mechanism, because there's a list of products that have been accepted in the deal, but tomorrow other products might become products that we want to protect too. So it has to be and to stay a dynamic mechanism.
Are Belgian beers on the current list over in Canada?
They aren't on the current list because we sell them so easily all over the world that we don't need protection.
Okay, Mr. Paul MAGNETTE, thanks so much for your time. Well,
thank you.
We sent our reporter Anaïs Guerrat to meet with some of France's famous cheesemakers to see what they think of this new protection and whether it will really be a boom for their market.
The Paris Farm Show is a showcase for the pride of French food: wine, ham, and above all, cheese. Many of these delicacies have been granted geographic indication labels, a moniker that grants protected status for specialty products. Now, out of the more than 1,500 protected products in the EU, the CETA deal will recognise over 140 in Canada. But many small French producers aren't yet tempted to take their place at the Canadian table.
I don't think our product can really be exported internationally that easily, for a very simple reason. For health reasons. We have to abide by the hygiene rules in the country where we're exporting. So for the US and Canada, we can't export these mimolette cheese here. They're not pasteurized. Then we have this classic soft cheese, and there's no problem here. We can export it.
One of Europe's flagship products heading for Canada is Camembert cheese. The GILLOT dairy produces cheese that's 100% made in Normandy. All the milk comes from cows raised within 30 kilometers. To meet France's own strict standards governing specialty cheeses, they already have to abide by a host of regulations.
There
are lots of specifications that we have to meet. At least 50% of the cows have to be from Normandy. That's no problem. Ours are all from Normandy. And they have to have a large amount of grassland to graze. And our food complements have to be certified non-genetically modified.
But the CETA deal does not change Canada's own strict hygiene rules. That means unpasteurized milk is out of the question. For Camembert producers like GILLOT, their export focus has now shifted to pasteurized products. And as well as compromising to meet Canadian regulations, the GILLOT dairy is innovating, creating new flavors to suit Canadian palates, like this barbecue camembert.
Canadians love barbecues. They have them all the time in the parks in Montreal. So we thought this would be a good product for us to launch with, to make us stand out from our rivals. We've had to make new packaging and adapt to the market, and hope for the sales to be good.
European cheese is one of the big winners of the CETA deal. Over 18,000 tons more will eventually be exported to Canada, tariff-free. A tantalizing prospect for those ready to take the plunge.
At any rate, the big industrial groups will benefit because it'll mean they can sell in even bigger quantities. The big Canadian importers will have bigger quotas, so they'll be able to buy more interesting and original cheese.
The geographic indication label should help prevent Canadian producers from copying European specialities. And for those not yet included, the CETA deal leaves room for more delicacies to be added to the list in future.
We're still in Wallonia, but I'm now joined by Bruno-Henri de Faron. You're a professor in agricultural economics and policy at the Catholic University of Leuven. We've been looking briefly at a report on the geographical indicators, this protection for certain EU products. But overall, what does Canada represent for our agricultural market, both in how much we might see Canadian produce arrive and how much the EU can benefit from the market over there?
The Canadian market for EU export is just maybe I would say 3 to 4% of EU export. The quantity that we will authorize to be imported in terms of a quota will still be very small compared with what we consume here in Europe. So we will open progressively for not even 1%. It is 0.4% for, I think, for pork and 0.6% for beef.
Of course, another major concern here on the EU side of that deal was the environmental concerns. You know, we have this precautionary principle where if we have the slightest doubt that a product might not be perfect, we don't bring it to market. We don't have the same rules on GMOs. And we fear that on the other side of the Atlantic, it's a lot different. How do you see it? Does that deal protect what we have here?
Okay, according to this agreement, no GMO, no beef with which we use hormones, growth hormones, will be accepted by the trade, by the imports here in Europe.
And is that something that's traceable? I mean, do we have to trust the Canadians on that front, or how does it work?
That is, generally the European Commission is very serious about tracing and inspecting what is going on the other side of the Atlantic. I have seen reports from veterinary reports, no problem. We have to trust those agencies doing generally a good job.
Mr. Henri de Ferrand, thanks so much for your time and those insights. Thanks also, of course, to you at home for having watched. So that brings us to the end of this edition of Talking Europe. See you again next time.